Life's greatest and most valuable lessons are often hidden deep within its darkest and most difficult moments. Watch, learn, and evolve along with us as we explore the resilience of the human spirit. Hit subscribe to stay updated on every new lesson.
I found out I was wearing my mother's pearl earrings. That detail shouldn't matter, but it's what I remember most clearly, reaching up to touch the left one as the valet took my coat, the cool weight of it against my fingertip, thinking she would have loved this place. The Harrington, 43rd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city my husband had spent 12 years convincing everyone he built from nothing. I knew almost every person in that room. The CFO's wife who always hugged me too long and smelled like sandalwood. The VP of operations, who once called me at midnight because my husband wasn't answering and they needed a signature. The mayor's chief of staff, who owed me, a favor I'd never collected. I walked in alone because my husband had texted 20 minutes earlier. Already here. Come find me. No, can't wait to see you. No, you'll look beautiful. Just coordinates, like I was a package being routed to its delivery point. I should have turned around then. I know that now. The ballroom was all amber light, and the kind of noise that costs money, low, confident, the hum of people who have never once worried about whether the check would clear. I took a glass of champagne from a passing tray and started looking for him. I found him near the east windows, laughing at something a man in a gray suit was saying. He looked good. He always looked good at these things. That was part of what I fell in love with, 22 years ago. The way he filled a room. The way strangers believed him instinctively. He saw me. Something moved across his face too fast for me to name it. Then he smiled, and I smiled back, and I started walking toward him, and that's when she stepped into my path. I knew who she was. Of course I did. Director of Strategic Partnerships, hired 18 months ago. I'd seen her name on documents I'd reviewed, her face in photos from the company retreat I hadn't attended because our younger daughter had her spring recital that weekend. She was maybe 32. Sharp in the way that certain people are sharp, all edges, no warmth. "Can I help you?" she said. Just like that. "Can I help you?" Like I was someone who had wandered in from the street. "I'm here for the gala," I said, because I genuinely thought she'd made a mistake. "I'm Audrey Whitfield, my husband." "I know who you are," she said it the way you'd say, "I know the store is closed." Final. Slightly bored, and I know this isn't really your scene anymore, is it? The noise around us didn't stop. People kept talking, kept laughing. Nobody turned to look. I felt heat crawl up the back of my neck. "Excuse me." She tilted her head. There was something almost performative about it, like she'd rehearsed. "He mentioned you might show up. He's been meaning to talk to you. This probably isn't the best place for that conversation." I looked past her to my husband. He was still standing by the windows. He was watching us. He did not move. "I was invited," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "My name is on the guest list." That was an oversight. She lifted one hand, and I watched in a kind of detached disbelief as she caught the eye of a security guard near the entrance. An actual security guard, near the entrance. An actual security guard. Young guy, broad shoulders, clearly uncomfortable when he understood what he was being asked to do. "Ma'am," he said to me, quietly, like he was trying to make it less awful, "if you'd like to step outside." "I am a co-founder of this company," I said. The words landed in a pocket of silence. A few heads turned. She smiled. Not kindly. She said. "The paperwork went through last quarter. But that's the conversation you two need to have privately. Tonight isn't about that." I looked at my husband one more time. He looked away. I set my champagne glass down on the nearest table, very carefully. I heard the small clink of it settling, and then I walked out. The elevator was empty. I stood in it and watched the numbers descend, and I thought about nothing. That's the only way I can describe it. My mind went completely white, like a screen before a film starts. My car was still in valet. I gave the ticket to the attendant, and while I waited, I called my older daughter Bea. She didn't pick up. I didn't leave a message. The drive home took 14 minutes. I know because I counted the songs on the radio. 3 full songs and the start of a 4th. I parked in the garage and sat there with the engine off in the dark, and that's when something shifted in my chest. Not grief, exactly. Not rage, something quieter than both. "You've been here before." "Not here?" Not thrown out of a party by a woman half my age while my husband watched, but this particular feeling of being erased, of being managed. I'd felt it at the board meeting 2 years ago when they'd restructured my founding role into a vague advisory position, and my husband had called it exciting news over dinner. I'd felt it when the company's Wikipedia page was last updated and my name appeared in one sentence in the middle of a paragraph with a footnote. I'd felt it on our anniversary last spring when he'd sent flowers to the office and the card read, "To my partner and everything," and I'd stood there holding it and thought, when did this start feeling like a performance? I went inside. I made tea. I didn't drink. I opened my laptop. Here's what I knew, sitting at my kitchen table at 9:47 p.m. on a Thursday. My name was still on the original founding documents. My name was still on a real estate trust that held the building the company's headquarters occupied. And there was one financial account, not joint, not his, not the company's, that I had opened in 1998, before we were married, before any of this existed, and that had grown very quietly for 22 years because I had never once touched it. My college roommate Petra, I should say, my college roommate is a corporate attorney, has been for 15 years. I texted her, "Are you awake?" She called me in 4 minutes. I told her everything, not just tonight. Everything. The restructuring, the paperwork that had apparently gone through last quarter without my knowledge. The way my husband had watched from across the room and said nothing. She was quiet for a long moment. "Audrey," she said, "do you still have access to the Henderson account?" "Yes." "And the Whitfield Family Trust documents are still in your name?" "Yes." "Don't touch anything tonight. Sleep. Call me at 8 tomorrow morning." I didn't sleep. By 6 a.m. I had read every document I'd signed in the last 3 years, not summaries, the actual documents, the ones with the small text and the paragraph breaks that look like formalities but aren't. My husband had always handled the legal logistics. That was the arrangement. He was better at it, or so the story went. I handled the things that didn't show up on balance sheets. The relationships, the reputation, the quiet work of being trusted by people who didn't need to be charmed. There was a clause. There is always a clause, it turns out, when you've been trusting someone for 20 years without reading the clauses. The transfer of my founding equity had been processed through a document I'd signed 14 months ago during what my husband had described as routine restructuring paperwork. I remember that afternoon. I'd been on a deadline for a client project I was consulting on. Bea had just started her new job and called me twice that week anxious about it, and my husband had set a folder in front of me at dinner and said, "Just a few signatures, nothing major, same as last year." I'd signed. I'd trusted him. When I called my attorney at 8 a.m., I didn't cry. I'd spent the night moving through something that felt, by morning, more like clarity than grief. "Here's what I want to know," I said to her. "Tell me what I still have." What I still had, the Henderson account, which had never been touched and which was, in 2024 dollars, significant. The real estate trust, the building, and my name, on which the company paid rent on a lease that renewed annually and which, I now noticed, had an unusual clause allowing the trust holder to adjust terms with 60 days' notice. The original founding documents, predating the restructuring, which named me as co-founder and which my attorney believed could form the basis of a very uncomfortable conversation for some very senior people. And 22 years of records, emails, meeting notes, introductions made, connections built, that told a story quite different from the one being told on the company's Wikipedia page. "What do you want to do?" my attorney asked. I thought about the security guard's face, the way he'd said "ma'am" so quietly, like he was apologizing with just that one word. I thought about my husband looking away. "I want to do this correctly," I said. "I want every I dotted. And I want it done before the board meets on the 15th. The board meeting was in 11 days. I won't walk you through every step of those 11 days because some of it is still ongoing and some of it belongs to my daughters, not to this story. But I'll tell you the things that mattered. I told Bea on day 3. She cried. Then she stopped crying and said, "What do you need me to do? That's my daughter. She processes fast and she shows up fast." She took the afternoon off work and sat with me at my kitchen table while I organized files, and she didn't offer opinions I hadn't asked for, and at one point she reached over and squeezed my hand without saying anything, and that was enough. My younger daughter, Ivy, took it harder. She's 24, and she's always believed in her father more completely than Bea has. That's just who she is. She sees the best in people. It's one of her most beautiful qualities. And the thing that made this hardest for her. I held her while she cried on the phone. I told her the truth. I wasn't doing this out of rage. I was doing it because the alternative was continuing to let someone else write the story of my own life. She called back 2 days later. I talked to Dad, she said. I know, I said. He said you're overreacting. I'd expected that. Ivy, I said, I need you to look up the date of our first board meeting. The original one before the company had a proper board. Do you remember? You were 7. You sat on the floor in the conference room and drew pictures. A pause. Yeah. Your dad was in the meeting. So was I. I had prepared every slide. I'd spent 3 weeks getting the format right. He introduced me as the brains behind the presentation. Do you remember what I was wearing? Another pause. A blue jacket. With the shoulder pads. I still have it, I said. I kept it. She was quiet for a moment. Mom, she said, what are you going to do? Something I should have done a long time ago, I said. The building lease adjustment notice went out on day 7, routed through my attorney's office, clean and polite and legally airtight. The new terms were not punitive. They were simply accurate. Market rate, which the current lease was not, by a considerable margin. On day 8, I transferred a portion of the Henderson account to a new entity my attorney and I had established, a small consulting firm, Whitfield Advisory Group. Not dramatic, just real. A place where the work I'd been doing informally for years, the connections, the industry knowledge, the ability to walk into a room and be trusted, could be compensated like work. On day 9, the calls started. Not from my husband first. From the CFO. Then the head of legal. Then a board member I'd known for 14 years, a man who'd been at our older daughter's graduation party, who called me from a personal cell and said, in a voice that told me he already knew what had happened at the gala, Audrey, I think there are some things we should discuss. I agree, I said. Have your assistant call mine. I had an assistant now. She was 27 and frighteningly efficient, and her name was not on any list of names this story needs to protect. Because she is exactly where she wants to be. My husband called on day 10. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. Voicemail. On the 3rd call I picked up. We need to talk, he said. We do, I agreed. My attorney will be in touch about scheduling. Audrey. A sound I hadn't heard from him in a long time. Something unsteady. The gala wasn't supposed to go like that. Which part? I asked. The part where she called security, or the part where you watched. He didn't answer. I'll see you at the board meeting, I said. Here's the thing about entering a room where people have decided you don't belong. You have to decide, in the moment before you open the door, who you're walking in as. I was not walking in as someone's wife. I was not walking in as a co-founder who had been quietly sidelined and was now asking for acknowledgement. I was walking in as the person who held the lease on the building, as the founder of a new consulting entity that 3 board members had already expressed interest in retaining, and as a woman who had spent 22 years learning exactly how every person in that room operated. I wore the blue jacket. Ivy had asked me to. The room went quiet when I entered. Not dramatically, just that particular quality of silence that happens when something shifts, and everyone in the space registers it at the same moment. She was there, of course she was. Seated 2 spots to the right of my husband, with a presentation open on her laptop and the particular expression of someone who has already rehearsed how this goes. My husband looked at me. I held his gaze for exactly as long as it took him to look away first. I sat down. My attorney sat beside me. The board chair, a woman named Dr. Achibi, whom I had personally introduced to this board 8 years ago, looked at the room and said, "Shall we begin?" What followed was 2 hours of procedural language doing the work that anger would have made messier. My attorney was precise and calm. The documentation was thorough. The lease terms, the founding history, the paper trail of what I had contributed and what had been quietly transferred without my genuine informed consent, all of it laid out on the table like a meal that had been prepared very carefully. At one point she tried to speak. I didn't look at her when I said, quietly, to the room, "I'd like to hear from the board, please." The board chair said, "I think that's appropriate." At another point my husband said my name, just my name, Audrey, in a tone I recognized from 22 years of marriage, the one that meant, "Please stop, you're embarrassing us both." It was the tone that had worked for a long time. It didn't work anymore. I'm going to ask you to hold your comments until the formal response period, my attorney said to him pleasantly, without looking up from her notes. I looked out the window. The city was very clear that morning. One of those high blue October days where everything looks like it's been cleaned. The board voted on the restructuring review before lunch. It was not unanimous, but it was a majority, and it was sufficient, and the chair called a brief recess, and when I stood up my legs were steadier than I expected. In the hallway, one of the long-standing board members, a man who'd known my husband since business school, and who I'd always suspected had never entirely approved of me, stopped beside me at the water station. "I owe you an apology," he said, without preamble. "You do," I agreed, without softening it. "Then, because I've never been interested in enemies I don't need, buy me coffee next week," he nodded. We went back inside. The part of the story people always want is what happened to her. I understand the impulse. I felt it too. I wanted the clean ending where everything visible was put right in a way everyone could see. What I can tell you, she resigned from the company 4 weeks later. I heard this from the CFO, who called me, oddly formally, as if delivering official news. The circumstances weren't announced publicly. I don't know what my husband told her, or when, or what that conversation sounded like. I found that I actually don't need to know. My husband and I are in the process of a separation that is being handled, as everything in my life is now being handled, with documentation and appropriate counsel. He showed up at my door 10 days after the board meeting, standing on the front step of the house where we'd raised our daughters, holding nothing, looking like he hadn't slept. "I made a terrible mistake," he said. "Several," I said. "Audrey, I know," I said. "I know you did. And I need you to understand that this isn't about punishing you." I meant it. I'd spent a lot of hours across those 11 days making sure I knew why I was doing what I was doing, and it was not, at its root, about making him suffer. This is about me being done living in a version of my life that someone else wrote. He stood there for a moment. "Is there anything?" "Not right now," I said. "Let the lawyers do their work." I closed the door. I stood in my hallway, in my house, in the city where I had built something real and been told more than once, in more than one way, that it wasn't mine. And I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not happy, not yet, but solid. Like I'd set something down that I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to have my hands free. I have a studio now. Not a grand thing, a room in a building near the river that I rent 2 days a week, where I work on the photography project I'd been telling myself I'd get to someday. Someday is a moving target when you're married to someone who needs you to be available. I've noticed that now that I'm not managing someone else's calendar, mine has grown significantly roomier. The consulting practice is slow but real. 3 clients, 2 of them referrals from board members who apparently had been wanting to retain someone with my specific background for some time but hadn't known how to approach it while I was still the founder's wife. That phrase, the founder's wife, I used to accept it as a kind of compliment. I've let it go now, like you let go of a name people called you, in a place you don't live anymore. Bea came to visit last month. She brought Ivy, who is doing better. She is finding her own understanding of all this at her own pace. And I am trying to be patient with that. Because I know that what she's sorting through is not just about her parents, but about the architecture of everything she thought was solid. We went out for dinner, the 3 of us. Good food, a long table, easy conversation about everything and nothing. At one point Ivy said out of nowhere, "Mom, you seem different." "Different how?" I asked. She thought about it. "Like, you're actually here," she said. "Like, present. You always seemed a little like you were half somewhere else." I thought about that for the rest of the night. Half somewhere else. Half in the next obligation, the next appearance, the next thing that needed to be managed or smoothed or quietly handled. I had been so good at it that I had mistaken it for a life. The pearl earrings are in a dish on my dresser. I still wear them sometimes. My mother bought them on a trip to Savannah in 1987, 3 years before I was born, and she wore them to everything that mattered to her. She was a woman who knew what was hers, and she held on to it. I'm learning to be that woman too. Not because of what happened at the Harrington. Not because of what happened at the Farrington. Not because of any single moment I could point to and say that's where I changed. It's quieter than that. It's the accumulation of days where I chose my own version of events over someone else's. That's the thing about being called invisible. Some people hear it and start to disappear. I heard it and decided, actually, no. Let me show you exactly what you missed. People ask me sometimes, not directly, but in the careful way people ask things they're not sure they're allowed to ask, whether I regret waiting so long, whether there's a part of me that wishes I'd seen it sooner, acted sooner, chosen myself sooner. The honest answer is, I don't think sooner was available to me, not because I was weak, but because I hadn't yet accumulated enough truth. You can't act on evidence you haven't collected. And the evidence came slowly, the way water finds its way through stone, not in a flood, but in a persistent, patient drip. The board restructuring that reduced me to a footnote. The anniversary card that felt like a press release. The gala and the security guard's apologetic eyes, and my husband's deliberate silence across a crowded room. That night wasn't the beginning of the end. It was just the moment I finally allowed myself to see what had already ended. What I've come to understand, and I mean, understand in my body, not just as an idea, is that the way people treat you is data. It's not personal failing, it's not fate, it's not something you earned or deserved. It's data about what they believe they can get away with. And when you accept diminishment quietly, year after year, you are teaching someone a lesson you never intended to teach, that you can be moved without consequence. Audrey. That is, I spent 22 years being excellent at things that didn't show up on balance sheets. I built relationships. I created trust. I held the room together when the room didn't know it needed holding. And I did all of it inside a story that someone else was writing, where I was the supporting character in my own life. The question that undid me, sitting in my dark garage that Thursday night, wasn't how did I get here? It was simpler and sharper than that. It was, if not now. When? What followed those 11 days wasn't revenge. I want to be clear about that, because I think revenge flattens something more interesting. What I did was reclaim authorship. I took the pen back. Every document I filed, every call I made to my attorney, every decision I made from a place of clarity rather than reaction. That was me rewriting the ending of a chapter that someone else had been drafting without my knowledge. B showed up and held my hand without being asked. Ivy cried and then came back and chose truth over comfort. Dr. Achibi called the vote. Small acts from people who already believed in something they hadn't needed to say out loud. The thing about integrity is that it's not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It just shows up consistently in the small choices, the document you actually read before you sign, the boundary you hold even when it costs something, the moment you decide that being difficult is a price worth paying if the alternative is disappearing. I am not a finished story. I am a woman in a studio near the river 2 days a week, learning what my hands do when no one needs them for anything else. I am a mother trying to model for her daughters what it looks like to rebuild without bitterness. I am a professional whose work is finally being valued at the rate it was always worth. The pearls are on my dresser. I'll wear them tomorrow. Not to prove anything, just because they're mine.